My initial plan for this build was to make a minion character, but I spent like half a day trying to decide what type of minions I wanted to go with, and I was just never really happy with an answer. I didn't really want to play Bama, since that requires a Transcended Gem, or multiple of them, and maybe it wouldn't really be online until after the campaign, so that kind of misses the whole point of what I'm doing with this. And Summon Raging Spirit feels more like minions in name only, since they don't really tank for you, or I mean, they don't tank for you at all. And these are the two most popular, allegedly minion builds, but neither of them summon a family of large adult sons in the way that normal minions usually operate. And now you can see how I spent something like 8 hours thinking about this and just never came to a conclusion. So instead I went a completely different way. I adopted a different family, a family made out of bombs. This is my version of a Pyroclast / Hexblast Miner Saboteur League starter, and it rules. So let's take a closer look, but first, don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video, find it helpful, and want to see more like it. As usual, I'm going to start with the pros and cons, and I'll do the positives first. It does stupid amounts of damage, and it requires no gear at all. It's easily the fastest campaign runner of the builds I've played thus far, and it has a fairly simple playstyle once you get to around the middle, maybe late point of Act 2, when you can use the Detonate Mines while moving Mastery. And it's even simpler than that from Act 6 onward, when you can just link Detonate Mines to automation support and just have all your mines automatically detonate. It can also do nearly all map mods. That's kind of one of the biggest advantages that miners have, is that they're able to just do all map mods with no issues. And so now let's talk about the downsides. Using mines in Act 1 and the first half of Act 2 requires a 2-button playstyle to throw and then detonate the mines, and that is a bit of a slog. And that's true for a lot of builds, I guess, but it really stood out to me in this run how much I did not love the state of mines now that you can't just put detonate mines on your left mouse button. Things got better as soon as I got the detonate mines while moving Mastery, but that still took a little while, like mid-20s or so, low 20s maybe. Mines just aren't a playstyle that everyone loves either. I like them. They add another scaling vector for dealing damage. They can help deal with like very long cast times, but they can turn people away because there is a lot of micromanagement, or at least a bit of micromanagement early on if you really want to maximize your damage output. I think the reason it doesn't bother me is that for the majority of content, you don't need to micromanage them. You kill the hell out of everything, even when you're just automating your mine detonations. You really only need to focus up for bosses, and that's actually a gameplay loop that really appeals to me. Coast through trash, brain off, get to a boss, lock in, brain on, go for it. I think that's good. The main downsides of the mine playstyle mostly go away once you make the swap to Hexblast Mines as well. It plays very similarly to a normal caster build, but with the added damage scaling and quality of life provided by using mines. Maybe another downside, maybe the biggest downside, is the build is not really very tanky during the campaign, or even super tanky after the campaign. Definitely the least tanky of all the builds I've played so far. And I think this is fine, but it made it more obvious, I think, to me, that it really punches above its weight class in terms of damage output. So you could be, like, hypothetically speaking, you could be level 30 and do enough damage to take down like a level 35 campaign boss, but you do still need to keep your level close to the zone level that you're in the campaign so that you don't get reduced XP for being too low level, and so that you don't just get instantly one-shot by bosses. I did the back half of the campaign with uncapped very uncapped resistances, and the only time it was a problem for me was in the Lunaris and Solaris fight, which I will show that off. I just kept continually getting one-tapped by Solaris because I had like 7 fire res or something. It was bad. And then I think maybe finally, Hexblast has kind of some shenanigans to it. It cannot detonate if there is no nearby target, even if you spam detonate mines, it just won't do anything. And so because of that, you can potentially softlock yourself by like throwing out all of your mines, hitting the mana reservation cap, and not being in range to detonate them. And that could be a problem, but it's not very common. It's something that's very preventable, and I don't really think it's a huge deal, but it is technically speaking something that can happen and you want to be aware of. All right, now let's move on to what makes the build work. I've seen quite a few people talk about Hexblast Mines over the years. Palstron and Captain Lance are like 2 of the more noteworthy people that I've seen talking about it, and so I think Hexblast is a fairly well-known skill, but it has a lot of complexity to it, so I'm going to give it a quick rundown. It is a skill that does a lot of damage. The reason that we don't just self-cast it is, frankly, it just has an insanely long cast time. I think the base cast time is 1 entire second, and you can get way more casts off in the same amount of time by just using mines. It is a skill that deals chaos damage, so it's able to benefit from Wither, for example, but it also bases its damage on the enemy's lowest resistance, and it can ignite Freeze and Shock. It deals 100% more damage if the enemy is hexed, and then it will also deal that single target damage as AoE if the enemy is hexed. It will remove one hex from the enemy, the one that has the shortest remaining duration, so you need a way to repeatedly reapply a hex. Since it is based on the enemy's lowest resistance, you want to get both elemental weakness and then some other resistance lowering curse onto your enemy. We apply both curses by putting elemental weakness in the Profane Proxy unique ring, which we put in our right ring slot so that it replaces the Shocking Skitterbot with an LE Weakness Skitterbot, and that's fine because we are going to be shocking everything that we hit anyway, so that Shocking Skitterbot is borderline useless. And then we also get in our other ring slot a Curse on Hit ring. The curse that is in the Curse on Hit ring is removed by Hexblast, deals damage, and then reapplies the curse. Now, according to the wiki, you're not supposed to use Conductivity as that Curse on Hit ring option, so that leaves Flammability and Frostbite as the two elemental resistance curses that you can use, along with LE Weakness. I vaguely remember either Palsteron or Captain Lance saying that you don't want to use Conductivity because I think the buffs are removed in reverse alphabetical order or something like that, but as far as I know, the curse that gets removed by Hexblast is just the one with the shortest remaining duration. I tried testing, I bought a Conductivity on Hit ring and went around and compared using that and a Flammability on Hit ring, and I really couldn't tell any difference between curse uptime or damage output. I tried comparing them just by like self-casting Hexblast on a 1-link in white tier 1 maps, and then I also tried it by doing like real quick clears through red tier maps, and I just couldn't tell a difference. I'm willing to trust the vague wisdom that lies in my brain from someone in the past. I also think that Flammability is just going to be the stronger option long term, since a Warlord ring, which is how you want to get Flammability on hit as a suffix eventually. Those can also get crit multi as a potential suffix. Warlord has crit multi and Flammability on hit as two of its possible suffixes, and that would be very good. That would be ideal. So whichever way you go, you will want an exposure implicit on your gloves that matches it. So if you're going with Flammability on hit, expose fire res as well. If you go with Frostbite on hit, expose cold res. Pretty simple. The way you make a Curse on Hit ring is also pretty easy, and I can show that off in Craft of Exile if I can pull it up here. And I can actually just show off some of these suffixes here. As you can see, Conductivity from Crusader, and then of course there's Reduced Effective Curses and Global Crit Chance. Those are pretty decent. Like if Conductivity were an option, then I could see going Crusader, but I've been told that Conductivity is bad, and so I'm going to take other people's wisdom. I'm just gonna believe that they know what they're saying more than I do, even though I wasn't able to really tell the difference. And just to clarify, the reason we're not using Despair is because we are trying to actually lower one of those elemental resistances. We can get them lower than the Chaos res just by using Despair on its own. And so by combining elemental weakness and then either Frostbite or Flammability, we're getting lower elemental weakness, which is what Hexblast is being calculated against. And then we're also able to get exposure from a gloves implicit, and then we can use Wither to increase the amount of chaos damage that is still being done. So pretty good tech built into this skill. So as I said, you have really two options here. You can go with a Redeemer ring, just craft it until you get Frostbite. That's pretty easy. The Warlord ring is a little bit more effort to get Flammability because it's also competing with Vulnerability, and you have no use for Vulnerability at all. It's literally worthless, but you could hypothetically get a Global Crit Multi and Flammability ring, and that would be better long term. So I think, personally, I would probably try to go cheap and just make a Frostbite ring initially, League start, and then once I'm ready to kind of transition into later on gearing, try to go for one that's both Flammability and Global Crit Multi. And so as you can see, these are both caster. The Flammability is a caster mod, the Frostbite is a caster mod, and so you can just take these to the Harvest bench, and I'll even pop into the emulator here and just make let's say a 2-stone item level 83. Let's do a Redeemer ring. And so the way that you would do this is you would just go to the Harvest bench and you would just add Reforge Caster, which is very cheap. I think it is 75. I want to say blue life force. Let's see. Caster, 75 blue life force. So pretty cheap, very much something that you can self-farm. And then you only have two possible caster mods. You have Cast Speed, which is a pretty high weight, or you have that curse suffix. So you would just do this until you got the curse that you were looking for instead of cast speed. Might take a little bit, but you know, there we go. Frostbite on hit, Ellie res, cold res. You know, that's actually a pretty nice ring. Like, I would be really happy with that on League start. That would be awesome. Additionally, you can just do Delve. You can just buy a Delve ring or do Delve and look for items that have cold, like Delve nodes that have rewards cold or fire-based items. Sometimes you can get curse on hit rings from Delve that way, and those can be very cheap. They're quite bad, but you know, they enable you to do all of your damage, so they're good enough. All right, now I want to talk about what makes this build special, and really I could summarize it in a single word: damage. So just to prove a point, I took this character, this wretched, vile level 76 character that doesn't even have enough strength to use shield charge. It doesn't have resistances capped, you know, it doesn't have its final Ascendancy nodes done, just to show that off as well. This explosive expert, I haven't done that. That's like 25% more damage by doing that. And I killed Guardian of the Hydra with this character. It was a scoured Hydra map, and I did die, so it's definitely not a hardcore viable strategy, but still, this build absolutely shreds on a bargain basement budget. I didn't use Wither Totems, I didn't use Zealotry Aura as a Divine Blessing supported aura. I didn't use like a lot of skills because I didn't have the sockets for them. The whole point of this was just to rush to and kill a Guardian boss as quickly as I could with the absolute worst possible gear. Most of this gear is campaign gear. I mean, a lot of this gear is really awful. Here is the extent of the items that I upgraded, that things that didn't just come from the campaign. 1, I gave myself a Tabula Rasa, pretty easy to farm up. 2, I got this Profane Proxy, and that's probably the most expensive item in the entire build, especially at a League start situation. This is a ring that maybe would cost 100 chaos, maybe a little more if the rolls are good like this one's are. It's not really that uncommon, it's just kind of desirable for people who are playing this build, so, you know, in order to farm this up, I would just simply stay in Heist until I'd farmed about, and obviously do the Chaos recipe while I'm in there, until I'd farmed about 100 Chaos or so, and bought one as quickly and cheaply as I could, and then I feel like I would be ready to kind of get out there and start mixing it up, and try and get myself a Curse on Hit ring in some way, and then go from there. So, Tabula Rasa, Profane Proxy, and then this Curse on Hit ring. And then finally I have this random imbued wand, not even a great base or anything. I bought it from ROG, it was garbage. I hit it with a Deafening Essence of Woe so that it would have this T1 spell damage prefix on it. It actually rolled a much nicer set of suffixes. I got like crit and crit multi and really good suffixes, but I didn't have an empty suffix to craft. And rather than a null, I just slapped another Deafening Essence of Woe and got a much worse ring that added fire and lightning damage don't do anything, so this is basically a 3-mod ring. Spell damage, crit chance for spells, which, hey, that's cool. And then crafted Mind Throwing Speed. And that's it. That's the extent of the gear that I went into killing a Guardian boss wearing. Also, the gems are pretty low level, 18, 17, 18, something like that. Pretty poor. Okay, now I want to shift over to talking about uniques, and there's only one truly mandatory unique for Hexblast, but there are a lot of great optional uniques, and one really good cheap option that you can use while you're still playing Pyroclast Mines, which I've kind of glossed over so far. I'm definitely going to talk about them, I think, at a bit more in depth in a little bit here, but you are going to be playing Pyroclast Mines basically from like level 28 up until around 68 to 75, probably more like 75 to 80, just basically whenever you have the rings required to make the swap over to Hexblast. That's when you'll stop playing Pyroclast Mines. But anyways, the first unique that you're going to use is March of the Legion. This isn't mandatory, this is just something that Captain Lance, I feel like I saw mentioned about a year or so ago, and it's really stuck in my mind all this time, and the reason is because Pyroclast Mine, as with all mines, is an aura skill. And so anything that increases aura gem levels, we're talking chest corruptions or these incredibly cheap boots. These are like 5 chaos even on League start, even with people knowing about this tech for a year. They're just very common, and they really are only useful for getting 5 extra levels. Even if you just go with very cheap ones and you get 3 extra levels onto your Pyroclast Mines, that's still super valuable. And then they also have move speed and Ellie res and a bit of energy shield, which can be pretty useful as well. And that really just gets you off to a great start for very cheap. 5 chaos, again, something you can farm in a single heist. If you're really enjoying Pyroclast Mines, you can stick with it for a bit, and you could actually justify picking up an Astral Projector. This ring can be a little bit expensive. I did play around with it a bit, It has a couple of positive advantages, you know, the fact that it gives you a bit of elemental ailment avoidance is whatever, but like the int and spell damage is good since mines do scale just like spells, except they use mine throwing speed instead of cast speed. That's really the main difference for their scaling compared to spells. But Nova spells, which again, Pyroclast Mine has this massive list of tags on it: Mine, Spell, Projectile, Fire, AoE, Aura, and then finally Nova. That actually works with Astral Projector, and it makes it so that when the Pyroclast Mines explode, instead of exploding from their location, which I'll just show one of these off here, you know, instead of exploding from there, you know, if an enemy was right where the toggle Atlas button is here and I detonated this, it would explode centered on them because of using the Astral Projector. Pretty good, really makes it so that you never miss with your Pyroclast Mines, is actually a pretty huge damage increase. Okay, now let's move over to the uniques that you're going to need as a Hexblast Miner. And obviously, I've already talked about the Profane Proxy. This just makes it so that you basically get a free Blasphemy Curse Aura by putting it in your right ring slot. And you use that to constantly apply Elemental Weakness. And then you use your Curse on Hit ring in the other slot to be, you know, reapplying and removing and reapplying and removing your other curse. And that is essentially, that is why Hexblast Mines is capable of functioning. Sandstorm Visage is a really valuable unique. It comes from Sanctum, which this is a build that really excels at doing Sanctum, and the value of this as a unique, you know, it does give a lot of energy shield, which is useful, but the real value is just simply that instead of using the crit chance on the spells, you use the crit chance of your main hand weapon. So you can get a weapon with a really high crit chance, not this imbued wand. You'll want to go with a wand for sure. You can go with, I'm trying to remember the name of the base here. We'll just find it here. There we go, Prophecy Wand. You go with a Prophecy Wand that has a base 8% crit chance, and then you put a Harvest Crit enchant on it as well. You probably use some Perfect Fossils to get the quality up as well. You can get yourself into the like 11% crit chance range on Hexblast, which is pretty amazing because, as you can see, the base crit chance for Hexblast is only 4%. It's very, very low, but the effectiveness of added damage is very high. It's very easy to get tons and tons of crit multi in this build, and you can really have very, very, very high crit chance with this build, and all you really need to achieve that is that Sandstorm Visage that shifts this horribly low crit chance up to something that's super, super high. And then because of that, you can run Mary Ellen's Fallacy. This will give you 40% less crit chance, which does actually affect that, but then you have Culling Strike on your crits, you have this absurd increase to global crit multi, and that's all that you get out of this, but that is still a massive damage increase to have those two combined with each other. Then defensively, you just have some very basic standard options. Cloak of Flame's really good, gives you a ton of fire res, gives you a ton of fizz taken as fire, really helps with the fact that you have no armor and really not a ton of tankiness in this build. You can use Taste of Hate for the same reason, take a bunch of fizz as cold. And then if you wanted to transition, instead of using Mary Ellen's Fallacy, if you wanted to transition into a charge stacker, which this is definitely an approach that can work, you can use a Badge of the Brotherhood, Void Battery, Malachi's Loop, Ralakesh's Impatience, all of the standard charge stacker stuff. And that is a build archetype that I absolutely adore. One of my absolute favorites in the game. So going that route is definitely something that I think could really, really work very well. All right, now I'm going to talk about my path of building here. And I did start out just by coming through here, since you are going to be using Stormblast Mine initially, and then switching into Pyroclast Mine, you are going to be doing elemental damage basically all the way up until you're into the kind of the early phase of maps. So you are going to value having some of these elemental damage nodes early on. You can, instead of taking Assassination right off the bat, you can come down the lower half here and take Elemental Focus instead. I just did this. I took Assassination because on the one hand, the damage is relatively comparable between Assassination and Elemental Focus. It's like a couple % more for the first 30 levels to take Ele Focus, which is a little better, a little bit more reliable than having more crit chance. You actually get a lot of crit chance throughout the course of leveling as a Shadow. You have a lot of items that'll give you crit chance that are kind of thrown at you, daggers and stuff, and it doesn't really matter what item you're using initially. You can use a mace, something that'll give you more elemental damage, might be a little bit more reliable. But then you don't have to spend the regret orbs respecking out of this and kind of respecking your pathing around from the way that a lot of other players might go with their initial like super optimized Saboteur start. And the thing is that you just do so much damage. that I don't really think it's a big deal if you're playing slightly suboptimally in the first 12 to 25 levels, because you very, very strongly overkill everything along the way anyways. Then at level 24, I like to come up and get this mine mastery. Basically, I want to get this mine mastery almost as quickly as possible. The detonate mines being triggered while moving is just really, really valuable, and I keep that locked in until I get to Act 6, and I'm able to buy a detonate mines gem from Lily Roth, and then link that to an automation support. At that point, I will then drop this for a more offensively valuable mastery. But this is the approach I go with, and then once I'm getting close to 28 is when you're able to start using Pyroclast Mines. I want to come over and take Snowforged and the Elemental Mastery that gives you a chance for hits to be inverted, but until that point you're using Stormblast Mines, and Stormblast Mines do lightning damage, so not fire damage, not cold damage, so none of this is going to be useful until you're in that like 24 to 28 range. And I think you're kind of better off just waiting until you actually are using Pyroclast Mines to spend 4 points to maximize its value. So you want to get these notables over here. They're really strong. Getting some of these mine masteries, 2% more damage on enemies per mine near them, basically 10% more damage. That's really good. And then you just keep progressing through the tree. I would say probably in Act 5 or so, I like to come get Eldritch Battery. That's when I feel like you have enough energy shield for that to actually really have a lot of value. The thing about mines, especially the ones that actually are mines instead of converting a spell into a mine, they have both a mana cost and a mana reservation cost to them. And the reservation is pretty affordable. It's pretty easy to handle, but the mana cost can actually add up while leveling. And so, you know, I would love to just get Eldritch Battery ASAP and not have to think about mana pots or mana flasks ever. But prior to about level 35 or 40 or so, basically somewhere in the like Act 4 to 5 range, you just don't have enough energy shield for Eldritch Battery to actually do the job. And you do still want to be picking up damage along the way there. Once you get into Act 3, Act 4, and you've gotten Pyroclast Mines and they're kind of online, you're doing so much damage that you're killing everything super easily. You can definitely afford to then go get Eldritch Battery ahead of even getting some of the like more offensive and defensive stuff. You will find that mana reservation can be kind of tricky, and so getting some more like mana reservation efficiency through the mana mastery, actually just having a larger mana pool can be really valuable as well. Since the mines reserve flat amounts of mana, having a larger pool is actually pretty valuable. And then from there, I basically just focus on getting more tankiness as I progress to the end of the campaign, getting the suppression mastery, getting more life, getting more suppression, all of that. You can eventually make your way to having a pretty significant amount of suppression. One thing that I do really like to get kind of later on, like basically as I'm transitioning out of the end of the campaign and into mapping, is getting this wheel here, Instinct. This is something I really love on Toxic Rain Pathfinder. It just really helps fuel Eldritch Battery, kind of solves mana for you. It gives you increased energy recharge rate, which is really valuable. You know, you might actually be able to run up against not having enough energy shield to cast your spells if you go far enough. And so being able to not just get like a bunch of valuable spell suppression out of these nodes, but then also getting a bunch of energy shield when you suppress damage, that can happen really quickly. This can really supercharge your energy shield just by having this 3-point wheel here. And then whenever you have those rings available, that is when you're going to want to make the change over to Hexblast. And in order to facilitate that, you're going to drop all of the elemental damage stuff. You're going to drop Snowforged. All of that's going to go away. And you're going to want to make sure you take Whispers of Doom. Some people will come up here, you know, the travel nodes that you take to Whispers of Doom, since you're applying one with your Skitterbot and you're applying the other with your Curse on Hit Ring, none of these small nodes on the way are going to matter at all. This one can matter. Some people will make their way up this way just to get this. I kind of prefer to just get there, just get there as cheaply as possible and kind of go that approach. But you know, this is sufficient to make Hexblast work as soon as you have your rings all set up. And then ideally, as you head into the level 90 and beyond range, you really have a couple of options. You can just kind of, before you have your cluster jewels online and functional, you can come over here and take some of these nodes like Instability, give yourself more power charges. You're taking these two charge nodes here. You're taking Fervor to get more power charges. You can even take the Charge Mastery, give yourself a lot more damage based on all of your charges, more mana from this node here. You do get more mana from this when you get Int. mana and I guess mana regen. Not that that's super valuable, but int and mana is more valuable than mana and mana on kill. And then just a bit more life. And then as you transition into using a cluster jewel, this is a setup that I would go with if I were doing like a Badge of the Brotherhood and cluster jewel setup. I would try to go for a large cluster jewel that has Unholy Grace, Unwaveringly Evil, and Wicked Paul. You can use Touch of Cruelty as one of your prefixes as well. That's also fine. And then ideally you would use medium cluster jewels that have Guerrilla Tactics and Surprise Sabotage. Those are just both very, very, very valuable. All right, now let's take a look at the skills. I have laid out some skill suggestions here. So I start using Stormblast Mine from level 2, and I stick with that all the way up through level 27. Once you kill General Gravicius, you're able to buy Pyroclast Mines, and I start using those immediately. And early on, I really like to get Swift Assembly. I mean, added lightning damage isn't great, but you can use it pretty early on. There are definitely a couple of other options available. Nothing that's really all that mandatory. Trap and Mind damage support is good once you get that available. That's pretty good. One little bit of tech you can use very early on is you can use an Orb of Storms and Stormblast Mine, and if you stand in Orb of Storms and throw Stormblast Mines out, that will cause the Orb of Storm to trigger and fire off more lightning beams. And you can use that with Summon Phantasm linked to the Orb of Storms to summon a bunch of Phantasms that'll kind of run around doing damage and just wreaking havoc for you. That can be pretty decent early on. Otherwise, another added lightning damage can work for that as well. And then Bear Trap, that is something you want to pick up. This just is a very basic skill. It's a trap. You don't really need to link it to anything or really do much with it. It just makes it so that enemies take 25% more damage from traps and mines. So you can just throw that down on uniques or rares and then hit them with a bunch of mines. As for mobility skills, you can use Frost Blink initially. I do prefer Flame Dash eventually, and then Shield Charge just works really well. That's something I think you'll actually want to buy from Syosa in the library, so I'm going to move that down here. Summon Skitterbots, you want to use that as soon as you get your hands on it. And then I have disabled it, but I pick up Assassin's Mark as soon as it's made available to me. I do like to use that on pretty much just like uniques. Big enemies, I will throw an Assassin's Mark on them, and I do that for the whole campaign. But once you get using Hexblast in the post-campaign environment, marks actually don't do anything. They don't interact with hexes at all. They just kind of brick your ability to have curses on enemies, so you want to make sure you're not using any sort of marks at all at that point. I really feel like the build kind of comes online for the campaign once you hit level 28 and you're able to pick up Pyroclast Mine. That's when things really start rocking, and I just like to lock in like Trap and Mine damage support. Minefield is really good. You get that in Act 4, and it basically works more or less like Multi-Strike, but for mines. And then Charged Mines is also super, super valuable. It just makes it so that you get tons of Frenzy and Power charges when you use mines. You're really, really getting a lot of damage out of all of those charges. As for auras, I just use Grace throughout the campaign. You know, hypothetically speaking, you could use Purity of Elements. That might make it so it's easier to fix your resistances. Maybe I should have done that. It certainly would be nice for some of the enemies that like to freeze or ignite to not have to deal with that. So Purity of Elements is an option for the campaign, but Grace is going to be better long-term for reasons that'll become obvious when we look at the Ascendancy. Shield Charge is just a very basic mobility skill. And once you get to Act 6, you can buy an Immortal Call, a Detonate Mines, and an Automation Support and link all those together. That really works. You don't have to use Immortal Call. I don't have the strength for it right now. 80 strength is a bit high, but it is definitely an option if you want to go that route. I know a lot of people really like to go that route, and it definitely makes sense to me. I'm just kind of a very, very pitiful gear situation, but this is exactly the same setup that I would go with on like Toxic Rain Pathfinder, Automation, Immortal Call support, or Automation support and Immortal Call. And I would do the exact same thing here as well. Once you're ready to switch over to Hexblast, you're going to want to use Wither combined with Spell Totem, multiple totem, so you're throwing down multiple Spell Totems and they're withering mobs up so that they are taking 90% more Chaos damage. That's going to increase your damage pretty massively. You know, if we turn that off, hold on. If we turn 15 Withered Stacks on here, you know, you can see the damage goes up quite substantially. And then again, another little bit of like knowledge that I've gained from all the years of Toxic Rain Pathfinder, you want to use Zealotry with a Divine Blessing support, and you really want to just like pop this. So what you would do is you would pop Zealotry, and then ideally you'd have more mana and energy shield than I do, but you would pop Zealotry and then throw your mines out as an enemy is getting ready to activate, like a boss is getting ready to activate, and then they would activate, and then they would get blown up before your Zealotry has fallen off. And that's basically all it's for, is just kind of that opening blast of burst damage while you have that up, and all of your mines together and a bear trap down, and they're getting rocked and hopefully dying instantly. And then here I have elemental weakness and flammability that are coming from my 2 rings. That's it for skills. Okay, now let's take a look at the Ascendancy, and Saboteur is a really crazy strong Ascendancy. I think you can play Hexblast Mines as a lot of different Ascendancies, a lot of people have. Trickster is definitely an option. I think Saboteur is deeply underrated at League Star. I mean, I guess it's very highly rated. It's rated. It has 2 really strong offensive notables in Demolitions Specialist and Explosive Expert, and it has 2 really strong defensive notables in Pyromaniac and Born in the Shadows. Born in the Shadows really stands out to me. It increases both the underlying value of evasion by blinding all of the enemies around you and making you immune to blind, and it also just gives you a baseline 15% damage reduction on top of that extra blind. It really does a lot of heavy lifting, and it allows the Pyromaniac to do its work as well. I don't want to discount Demolition Specialist as well, though. The effects of auras from mines can be pretty huge, and getting that increased by 150% is really amazing. And then Explosives Expert, because you are burning, shocking, and chilling all of the enemies you fight by using Hexblast, you're getting all 3 of these. You're getting Elemental Penetration, you're getting Crit Chance, and you're getting Crit Multi. Huge. And then Pyromaniac's very simple. You get Ignite and Shock Immune, and you get essentially 10% of life per second of healing just by having blown up a bunch of mines all the time. Okay, now I have 3 weird little mechanics concerning mines that I kind of want to highlight before we wrap up. First off, mine throwing speed is a valuable stat, but it's also pretty uncommon. It's something that you're going to want to just craft onto your wand, unless you're going with the full charge stacker void battery setup, in which case, unique wand, you won't be able to craft that. Throwing speed is only available on weapons and helmets, and it is a suffix, and it's something that you're going to want in both spots, at least until you have a Sandstorm Visage. I have it crafted on my weapon. I did not have it on my helm because I needed that to get close to, not up to, but close to Cold Res cap. Other than using throwing speed instead of cast speed, mines really scale a lot like spells, so you want spell damage, you want spell crit, and you want basically all of the normal spell stuff. You just don't care about cast speed, you care about mine throwing speed. Alright, second, I do want to talk a little bit more about mine auras. So I have a high impact mine support, which is what converts our Hexblast instead of just being, a hex, skill that you cast onto enemies. It turns it into a mine that you can throw around. And as we can see here at the very bottom line there, each mine from supported skills applies a 2% chance to deal double damage to hits against enemies near it, up to a maximum of 100%. So because of the 150% increased effect of mine auras from Demolition Specialist, that is 5% per mine. So if you have 20 mines near an enemy and then you detonate them all, they will all do double damage, which is pretty great. For Pyroclast Mine, it's actually quite a bit more interesting, like visually, and a little bit more complicated, and I'll just show that off here. Okay, so as you can see, Pyroclast Mine fires an additional projectile for every 4 prior mines in the detonation sequence, and each mine adds 8 to 12 fire damage to hits against enemies near it, up to a maximum of 407 to 611 flat fire damage added to the skill. So when you detonate mines, you start a chain that runs through all of the mines until you hit 0. I'll show off by detonating a couple here. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Interesting. And then sometimes you have the chance for mines to not be consumed when they detonate, to detonate a second time. And yeah, you can see a little bit of fun happening here. You can continue adding to the chain by throwing more mines out while the chain is still going, but if you hit detonate mines midway through a chain, then it restarts back at 1. So I'll show off some differences here. I'll just throw out like 5 mines. That's what 5 Pyroclast mines look like. My cap is 23 mines at a time. So let's just go ahead and pop those off. And as you can see, they're getting pretty dynamic and enjoyable by the end. So if I I'm gonna throw them all out, then I'm gonna detonate, and then we'll see kind of just how many crazy amounts of detonations we get. 1 tap of detonate mines, and then just throw. I mean, it's so many explosives happening at once that it is literally like slowing down my computer. I can tell my frame rate is dropping because of how many particles are happening at once. Now, if we turn on automation support, I'll turn on automation support after I've gotten all 23 mines out, and then I'll just keep throwing through it. I'm just going to turn on automation support and throw through it. As you can see, nowhere close to the amount of projectiles happening at the same time. This is okay while you're mapping. You can just leave automation support on and just constantly move, and it basically just turns into a normal caster build, and this is fine. But when you're like loading up on a boss, you want to get all of those things out, get your bear trap down, and then tap detonate, have automation support turned off once, but have it off. Tap detonate mines once instead of turning automation back on. Tap detonate once, and then just throw through it until you're getting this insane volley of projectiles onto the boss. This is a little bit different from the way that you want to play Hexblast. Hexblast is a lot more forgiving because Hexblast Mines, because you're using high impact mine support, which doesn't have the same, like, each additional projectile fires more for each mine in the detonation sequence. Because you're not having that at all, you really are fine with just kind of throwing them out and blowing them up as quickly as you can. I'm obviously not able to blow these up because I don't have a target nearby, and that is the thing about Hexblast. It does actually have to have a target and be able to cast. Like, if I take the Hexblast mine out, I'm clicking. It just will not cast because there is nothing to hit with the Hexblast. So for Hexblast, because we're using high impact mine support to turn it into a mine, the reservation cost becomes the same as the base cost of the skill. So using things like ring prefixes that reduce mana cost, or like minus mana cost, those won't actually change the reservation value. As you can see here, we can look, my reservation value is 17 mana because I only have a 5 link together. If I put in a 6, it goes to 20. The mana cost is changing, obviously, but the mana cost, like if I go put a minus, in fact, I'll just demonstrate here. If I craft non-channeling skills have minus mana cost. Okay, right now it's 20 reservation and 37 mana. And now it's 31 mana, still 20 reservation. This means that the cost can be pretty high compared to your base mana pool, and that makes it kind of hard to fully reserve all of your mines at once and get the full value out of that high impact mine support. Like if we compare here, just to use a comparison, we have Pyroclast Mines on a 6 link right here, and the reservation is only 9 mana. And this is on a 6 link. So this is really only something you're gonna have to deal with once you've made the swap over to Hexblast. And it's not something that will prevent Hexblast from being functional early on. It's just something that takes a lot of the high-end damage potential away from Hexblast Mines. It's definitely something you're going to want to solve. And so we have really only 2 main mechanics for solving this issue, and they're both pretty simple. The main way to accomplish having enough mana to reserve all of this and actually get 23 mines out at a time instead of being capped like I am at like 16 right now is just to have more mana on your gear. Just have a larger mana pool, because this is reserving flat mana. Mana prefixes are pretty common, especially early on in a trade league, and they're usually not very desirable to most builds, so you can generally get that gear pretty cheaply. Option number 2 is just to increase your mana reservation efficiency, and you can do that through a combination of passives in the passive tree. I am still down here taking charisma. Hypothetically speaking, you could take influence as well, potentially. You could theoretically take both of the mana nodes, although I don't think I would do that. I think that is worse than just taking more damage nodes and solving this by just getting more mana on your gear. It is theoretically something you could do in an SSF situation just to like really jankily make it work for the time being. And then, of course, you can also get like more mana reservation efficiency as a prefix on rare jewels or as a corrupted jewel implicit. More mana reservation efficiency, especially from jewels, is usually a lot more expensive and less effective than just going for more mana on your gear. You get more mana as a rare jewel prefix, for example. That's usually fairly cheap, but you can kind of do both. The goal here is just to get enough of both to ensure that you can actually afford to throw out a full 23 mines. I can't do that right now with Hexblast, but if I switch over to Pyroclast, I very easily can. If I have it bound, of course, we can see very easily 23 Pyroclast mines. Easy peasy. Okay, as with the previous build, I'm going to rank this on a scale of fun to not fun. Do I think this build is fun? Yes, very much so. It is a really fun league starter. It has some weaknesses, which really just boils down to not being very tanky, and then also kinda needing to make the swap over to Hexblast Mines, but that's fine. For what it's worth, Pyroclast Mines are very, very strong. I did also take down, just to compare, I took down a Scoured Hydra with just the Pyroclast Mines on the same very, very scuffed character. Level 16 Pyroclast Mine even, and I obviously didn't use a Void manipulation support. I switched over to a level 1 increased crit damage support that I think I leveled up to like 5 by the time I got there. So like a 5.5 link, 4.5 link, something like that. For that, I think that is pretty good, all things considered, in terms of the damage output that I got out of a very bad character. I also think it does kind of keep your options open in case you're having a little bit of trouble getting a profane proxy or a flammability or frostbite on hit ring. To be able to just rock with pyroclast mines until you've hit that point works pretty well. You know, I think in terms of the tankiness, it is tankier than you might think while mapping, primarily due to Born in the Shadows and Grace synergizing pretty nicely. And when it comes to bossing, the real trick is just don't get hit. And that's probably the biggest issue I have with this build. It's not very new player friendly. It's not complicated to play. It's not actually hard mechanically to play. There's not a lot of keybinds or skills to micromanage. So on that front, I think it is actually kind of decent for a newer player, but you need a fair amount of game knowledge and boss knowledge in order to stay alive and take advantage of all the insane damage that it deals. Bottom line, you want to make big currency from bossing super early on if you're playing this build, so if you don't already know all the in-game bosses fairly well, you're probably not going to have a great time. And this is probably why the Korean player base pretty much unilaterally declared this the best build in the game for running Sanctum, since Sanctum is a just don't get hit league mechanic that is super rewarding but requires a lot of single target damage and doesn't reward you for being tanky in the way that standard builds usually are. So this is a perfect early league start boss farmer and an all-league Sanctum farmer, and it absolutely is an S-tier build for both of those applications, but it's just kind of mid as a regular map farmer until you throw a little bit of currency at it. It's effectively the exact mirror opposite of Righteous Fire Chieftain. So this was my favorite of the builds I've played thus far. It slammed through the campaign and absolutely pipes in-game bosses. Even just a Pyroclast Miner, as I've said, is very, very strong. You could absolutely just rock with that instead of switching to Hexblast at all, but it really does jump up to another level in terms of both damage output and quality of life once you swap to Hexblast. With that being said, the Mine playstyle is unforgiving compared to builds like Bone Zone Jug and Splitting Steel Champion, and gearing is way more difficult than just stacking life and fire res on a chieftain, so you definitely do want to be prepared for that before you commit to this build. If you're interested in it, and you probably should be because it rules, I would do at least one practice run to see what it's like and be prepared when league start day comes. The point of playing this build is to have a really fast league start where you race to the end game and you obliterate a bunch of bosses and sell their uniques, or potentially even sell boss carries and make an astronomical amount of currency in the first weekend of the league. This build is able to facilitate all of that by dealing obscene amounts of single target damage on virtually zero budget, and that's awesome. The only real downside is that it is a window that doesn't stay open for very long. It is extremely lucrative for the first couple of days, and then that window slams shut like a guillotine, and you either want to move on to serious Sanctum farming, higher level content, or another build. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.